Shalom, first and foremost, like to give all praise to Yahweh, Ba'Hashem, Yahweh Shai, Ba'Hashem, Rakakadash, double honors, ales and apostles of Great Millstone, who are teaching this truth in sincerity. And a shout out to Yakims out there in the four quarters of the earth proclaiming this truth. Braka the Yahweh, Braka the Yahweh Shai, Ba'Hashem, Rakakadash, Brakatum. So, fifth week, we're in the Passover now. And as you know, if you've just stumbled on to this, or this is your first time in, it should be a no-brainer that Easter has nothing to do with the Passover whatsoever. That as you came into this, you found out that there's a lot of things that is required of you as an Israelite if you just came into this, you shouldn't even be doing this until you have more experience in this. But nonetheless, though, as you hang out more with the elders and the apostles and on down, though, you find out that there's a lot more to this Passover. That's not just eating a lamb dinner, and it's not just getting the bread out of the house, but indeed, you have to eat better herbs. You have to have sliced up horseradish root, and you have to eat, corn tortillas, which is the best way to do it. That's what unleavened bread is. So you're finding out that this has a lot more that they don't even teach you this stuff, man. They don't even teach you that stuff. The false prophet, the Catholic Church didn't even teach you that stuff, right? No, they taught you about the Easter Bunny, and they taught you about a bunch of pagan shit, Roman Catholic shit that had nothing to do with Yahweh Shai whatsoever. They tried to mold that into there. It had nothing to do with his suffering, Good Friday, all that other shit that you were taught. These are all pagan customs because they just basically trying to bring in Greek mythology and, of course, the customs of Egypt. But again, the Most High is about to deliver his people from this land of Egypt, in which they wickedly exercise themselves. You see, they've been wickedly exercising themselves. We've been out here teaching the truth, that we are the true Hebrew Israelites, but yet at the same time, they still wish to, stay in the customs of Esau Edom, staying in the customs of the wicked. So therefore, the Most High ain't going to recognize them either, but it's going to cut off 2/3. The fatness of Jacob shall wax lean, meaning that 2/3 are about to be cut off in the destruction. As you know, over the weekend, this ground operation plan did not go very well, and the military of Iran has already arrested search and rescue operations. They have already arrested a few, and they've also shot down rescue choppers as well, as an F-15 and an A-10 Warhawk, and they caught one of the other pilots of the A-10 Warhawk, so it's not going so good. And usually when they do that, that means that they're trying to just bomb a little bit so they can launch ground troops into both Karg Island, and they want to do a suicide mission in trying to actually go to the Kushner power plant and actually extract uranium, which is why there was also strikes against the Kushner nuclear power plant. And Donald Trump, in his temper tantrums, has just said if they don't fucking open up the fucking Strait of Hormuz, there's going to be fucking hell to pay. Once again, another 48-hour deadline. So by Tuesday, if they don't fucking open up the Strait of Hormuz, they're going to be hell to pay, and it's going to be more bombing of bridges. It's going to be more bombing of, energy infrastructure. So that's what the king of Babylon has threatened, against the Persians. And like everything else, though, 2/3 of our people are also going to be in that war. They're not coming back from this. There's no turning back. And in fact, a lot of the soldiers have been turning tail. I already knew that at the very beginning of this, that they were already flushing the toilets deliberately on them ships, just so they wouldn't have to fight a war. Because they're tired of fighting for the fucking Israeli state, the Israelis that control everything, right? They don't want to fight King Bibi's war. It has nothing to do with them. But nonetheless, though, that's what's going on, right? The spirit of Egypt is melting. Babylon the Great has fallen. You see, like everything else, though, we know the mysteries of Babylon now. We know who Mystery Babylon is. And we're here. We're here in that time of Mystery Babylon the Great. America, is in the scriptures. It's known as Mystery Babylon the Great. And like everything else, though, she's waxing thin, right? Because got bases all over the place and is turning against allies, right? And the allies are turning against that, at the same time, the king of Babylon, Nero 47, Donald Trump was also admitted into the hospital last night. Rumor has it that he's in critical condition. Even though he's been able to tout stuff. So, like everything else, though, I just think that's speculation. I think that, of course his health is deteriorating. It takes a lot to be the wicked of the whole earth, right? But like everything else, though, the Most High's got him where he's supposed to be. I believe this is the final Trump. This is the final nail in the coffin, because he sure is accelerating everything. He seems to be the one that the Most High has put there. And Vladimir Putin fits the character of Gog, and the land of Magog, right? Vladimir Putin is exactly where he's supposed to be, right? As like everything else, though, now, with the rumors, soon to be a ground offensive in Iran, more rumors coming out that Russia's planning to bring in their troops, as well as China bringing in their troops, right? So there you are, more prophecy being fulfilled, right? Because it did say, be thou guard unto them, right? And a lookout. We already know that Russia's been providing intelligence, to Iran, but like everything else, though, is not going to allow Iran to be taken over. They're not going to allow it. So like everything else, though, you're going to see more and more of Magog getting involved, And there's one more thing to be ushered in, and that is stablecoin. Stablecoin, central bank digital currencies. Well, they have plans for that, and they also have plans for lockdowns. See, because again, energy lockdowns are coming. This time it's over energy lockdowns because, of course, there's shortages. There's shortages because the Strait of Hormuz is closed, and so is the Red Sea. So therefore, no ships will be leaving. And like everything else, though, the people, well, they're not really so happy right now. Well, a lot of people find out that it costs too much to even go to work. It costs them more in gas to even fucking go to work. So there's going to be no grinding here in Babylon, right? The grinding shall cease. See, like everything else, though, it's a domino effect. Because they just can't keep kicking that can down the road. Now there's hell to pay, right? And that's key words that's been used, right? That there's going to be hell to pay, the likes of which has never been seen before, right? King of Babylon loves to throw that one. The likes of which they've never seen before. So, like everything else, though, Yahweh Shai is about to deliver us from this place. That's why we come out here and we do everything diligently, right? Because there will be a famine of the word soon, right? Because they're going to shut this down very soon. Make no mistake about it. They're tired of us, the elites, because we keep on blowing the whistle and everything. They're tired of the whistleblowers, and it just keeps on foiling their plan, you see, because it's very well known who we are now, prophets of doom. So, he's going to come after us. We already are prepared for this, just like Iran has been prepared for the invasion. We're prepared for what Esau's going to do. We're prepared for the FEMA camps. We're prepared for him trying to make us submit and take the MOTB. We're prepared for this. We've been preparing for this for some time. And he's going to fail like he's been doing in Iran. Because the elect, he will not be able to deceive the elect into taking the MOTB. Even if we must die, even if we must be beheaded for refusing it, we're still not going to take it. 2nd Ezra chapter 15, verse 11. I will bring them with a mighty hand and a stretched out arm, and smite Egypt with plagues as before, and destroy all the land thereof. Now, like everything else, though, biggest difference between ancient Egypt and current Egypt is, Pharaoh's armies were wiped out, but, Egypt, the land of Egypt was still left intact. So he never destroyed all the land. So it's talking about modern-day Egypt, which is right here, Babylon, America, Mystery Babylon the Great, because we already uncovered the mysteries, right? Egypt shall mourn, and the foundation of it shall be smitten with the plague and punishment that Yahweh shall bring upon that. And what's that talking about? Nuclear destruction, an ultimate end to Esau's kingdom. Now, nuclear war doesn't sound too far-fetched like it used to, right? We used to tell you a long time ago. We've been saying it for quite a long time that America's going to be consumed by nuclear fire, that there is going to be a third world war. And when they go after Iran, that ultimately would bring about that third world war. Here we are. We're not telling you. Well, we are, but we aren't. We told you way before. Now we're just reporting on it as it happens. See? A prophet's been among you. you know that what we are saying is the truth, is that when you shall see troops going into Saudi Arabia and all the United Arab Emirates and all those areas there, which is where that barren land is, that desolate area, that indeed, that the dragons of Arabia, well, that's talking about the Persian Gulf, to go to war with Iran, and that would bring about World War III, causing Damascus to cease in that day as well, because they've been using Syria as a way of launching their war of terror. Syria, once that fell, well, you knew the rest of the prophecy would fall into place, that they were going after Iran next. Well, they swore in Nero 47. The first thing they did is started bombing Iran by about June, and then they just recently attacked on February 28th. So you see, like everything else, all the pieces have fallen into play. But Iran's not looking for a ceasefire. Not this time. An end to the war. Which the only way to end the war is to end the Zionist regime and the U.S. That supports it, right? Ending the West, for that matter. They that till the ground shall mourn, for the seeds shall fail through the blasting of hell and with a fearful consolation. When they see this nuclear destruction falling. But also the fact that it's going to be broken down. It's going to be bankrupt. You're already hearing about that. They're trying to propose more of a budget, but cutting Medicare. He's threatened to cut Social Security just to pay for this war, which is a blank check. Woe to the world and them that dwell therein. So this is a third world war. For the sword and the destruction draweth nigh, and one people shall stand up and fight against another with swords in their hands. So in other words, things are about to get even worse than it even was on the No Kings protest, which was the largest yet. But it's going to get a lot more louder. It's going to be louder than words. For there shall be sedition among men, and invading one another, which shall not regard the kings and their princes, and the course of their actions shall stand in power. Meaning that, hey man, it's survival of the fittest. It's kill or be killed. Man shall desire to go into a city, and shall not be able. Why? Because the pride of the city shall be troubled, and the houses shall be destroyed, and men shall be afraid. No mercy will be shown whatsoever. It's going to be uproars everywhere. Man shall have no desire, have no pity upon his neighbor, but shall destroy their houses with the sword, and spoil their goods because of lack of bread and for great tribulation. This is going to happen worldwide, but especially here in Babylon. So Egypt, Babylon, is about to be destroyed. Mystery Babylon the Great is America. We've been telling you that for quite some time. It's not the Catholic Church. That's a false prophet system. But the place where the beast and the false prophet are is talking about America. Which is soon to become a lake of fire by way of that nuclear destruction. Also known as a cup of wrath of his indignation. Because this place, has indignation. The Most High has indignation for this place. Because they touched the apple of his eye. See, we were not supposed to drink of that cup, but we assuredly have drunken, as it tells us in Jeremiah 49. So, like everything else, though, man, it's all building up. And we're just in the midst of the Passover. The Passover ends in 3 more days. At the end of Wednesday, it's over. But guess what's about to befall? Well, are you waiting for it? Yeah. They're going to usher in the MOTB. They're going to have, you already seen it in Australia and other places, right? But soon after, the rest of the places will fall. They'll have to fall in line with the energy crisis, the climate change lockdowns. You heard a phrase like that, right? World Economic Forum was talking about, what do you call that again? I just said it a minute ago. But climate change lockdowns, right? And what better way than with a fuel crisis, right? Because they wanted you to just drive electric vehicles, which they can control. They want to regulate how much time, you can spend, And most of all, though, they want curfews. You're only allowed a certain amount of time because everything's going to turn into those strong cities. Or you just be on the outside, like they show you in Demolition Man. Those that are not chipped, who don't want to get down, don't want to worship the beast in its image, will just be on these sewer pits, just around those other desolate areas, because they're not going to be a part of that city. You know, and it did show you the MOTB system in Demolition Man, which was meant to be a comedy, but we've seen the spiritual side of it, you know, that indeed they're going to, and they're going to reprogram people, right? Because these chips are programmable. Welcome to Elon Musk's, brain chips, because that's what it really was getting into. You know, Simon Phoenix, was reprogrammed, and he was taught all these things, and so was, the cop that was meant to come after him. You know, so like everything else, though, you know, John Spartan, I believe was his name. John Spartan was also reprogrammed, but pretty much, though, he found out that he had been implanted because he was kept on ice for a long time. And in this movie, though, everybody was pretty much neutered down, you know. Be well was their common saying, and they all sort of gathered around this spiritual leader, right? You know, like a pope type of figure. Well, like everything else, though, you know, the false prophet has always had the false prophet system has always had like the Pope, right? So there you are, you know. But that's the false prophet. But most of all, the false religious system of the world is what the false prophet represents. Yeah, it's the Catholic Church and it's a whole bunch of things, but nonetheless, though, the place where the beast and the false prophet are is Babylon the Great, because it spread its whoredoms all over the world. You know, plantation Christianity was spread all over the world, and it's been a lie. You know, they told you that, you could do that, but thou will, right? Once saved, always saved. Oh, and you just call upon the name JC and you'll be saved. And they only said John 3:16, and they took that out of context, because like everything else, though, world in this scripture, you have to get back to the Hebrew, didn't mean cosmos. He wasn't talking about the cosmos. So no, not everybody could come into this. You had to be an Israelite. You had to be a Hebrew Israelite in order to come into this, you see. And they told you that, you could just claim to be a Christian. That anybody could claim to be a Christian. No, these are Israelites who followed Yahushua wherever he goes. And they didn't even tell you his real name either. Told you his name was JC, and then he was all love. Does it look like there's love out there? Now that we found love, what are we going to do with it? That doesn't seem to be the spirit that's going around, right? Yeah, you might have heard that song, but that's not the spirit that's going out, right? No, it's been constant war. Jihad has been declared, right? You know, a vengeance. And you're finding out that pretty much Iran has the upper hand. How did that happen? How did the Persians get the upper hand? Well, simply put, all empires rule for about 250 years, and Babylon the Great is at its 250th year mark. So this could be the end of Babylon the Great this year. Could happen this year, or beginning of next year. But they have to usher in the New World Order. A New World Order. Well, how's that happen? Oh, by ending the petrodollar system, right? The petrodollar. Yeah, we can see how good that is when the oil is shut down. You know, that indeed, that would kill the petrodollar. You can see how they can usher that in with a new digital currency. So that would end the old world order, wouldn't it? You know, and then they usher in a new one, you know. But the whore that rides the beast shall be utterly burned with fire. That's talking about this place, that mystery Babylon the Great being burned with fire. And that is by nuclear destructions. Well, you're seeing Trump fuck off all the allies. He's fucking off NATO. He's fucking off the EU. Yeah, he's fucking off everybody. You know, he starts a war, but he expects them to clean it up. And they refuse to help, you know. Italy and Spain have refused to help. And by the way, Iraq, well, they're allowed to pass. You know why? Because Iraq does not support this war against Iran either. So Iraq is allowed to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. China is allowed. India is allowed. But the U.S. is not. If there's any U.S. or Israeli interest, they are not allowed to pass. And the Red Sea, the same goes there. Because Yemen controls that side, you see. Like everything else, though, you're seeing all these other major powers shift. And we're going to continue to see shifting, you know, as they usher in a new world order, which is already commencing. If the petrodollar is gone, if the U.S. economy ain't worth shit, and you see that it ain't worth shit, you know, hey, just expect everything to pick up here on out, man. Especially after this Passover concludes, you know. We're already in World War III. This is week 5 of World War III. You know, they just ain't calling it that, right? No, they're just calling it, the Iran War. That's what they're calling it. They're just calling it the Iran War. trying to make it sound light. Because, oh yeah, this will be over in a couple weeks. You've been hearing that. Oh, this will be over in 2 or 3 weeks. Well, this could last till September. Oh, this could last it only takes a few days. Well, none of that is there. You find out that there's bullshit and then there's Trump shit. Trump just happens to take bullshit to another level. You already know that it's bullshit anyways, that everything Babylon the Great has said is utter fucking bullshit. But Trump takes it to a whole other level, the likes of which nobody has ever seen before. Trump is so full of shit, that pretty much so. He's even called himself the Messiah. There's actually depictions of him looking like Cesare Borgia, where he's declared himself to be the Messiah. And there's others saying that he's the Messiah too. That's how much people worship this king of Babylon, right? And he wants to put himself on the $100 bill, even though they're going to get rid of cash very soon. But he is so full of himself. There's bullshit, and then there's Trump shit. A whole other level. And a lot of people don't like him. They already know, and that's people within their own ranks. You see what's happening in the military, though? Anybody that's telling them this is suicide is getting fired. Anybody doesn't go along with Hegseth, the fucking douche, or chump, is getting fired. And people are stepping down, too. You already know Marjorie Taylor, I believe her name was. Well, she stepped down last month, or a couple months ago, back in December, because she probably knew that they were going to bomb Iran, and it didn't make any sense anyways, because Iran was no threat. Now, that's a whole other story. And they have friends. They have lots of friends. The axis of resistance, that never dissolved. They just kind of remained quiet while, they thought that they were taking down Yemeni armed forces. They thought that they were weakening Hezbollah. Well, Hezbollah has destroyed a lot of Israeli shit, too. And they're launching rockets into the Israeli state. Iran is launching rockets into the Israeli state. And guess what? Their defenses ain't going to hold up much longer. You already see that fucking place is on fire. And that they're just being decimated right and left. So pretty much, though, it's looking like a retreat to Damascus, and that's probably what's going to cause it to cease in that day. Either way, that event hasn't happened yet. But it seems to conclude with World War III, that the kingdom ceases from Damascus, because you could consider the Syrian government, ISIS that's ruling it, to be in favor of the Israeli state. Because, of course, Hezbollah was fucking pounding the shit out of them during that whole time, And, of course, also so was Iran, for that matter, was helping the Syrian internment government under Bashar al-Assad, the Syrian Arab army. So, like everything else, it makes perfect sense that they would be on the side of the Israelis in the U.S. occupation, which is right there, in Syria, because they've been chased out of Iraq. The Iraqi resistance forces, well, they've come up a lot too. So, like everything else. So now they're moving the oil through Syria. See, that's the other thing. They knew that they were going to have to move the oil through Syria and move it up north. So that's what they're doing. They're trying to get, the oil through Syria, and through that land and up through the Mediterranean Sea. So Gomer and all its troops is going to have to do something. Eventually they're going to turn against them. But for right now, they're still a NATO ally. That's all about to change. See, a lot of things are about to change really soon as this war progresses, because even Erdogan says that if push came to shove and this war didn't end soon, that they would be fighting on the side of Iran. So you see where that is. Not to mention the Israeli state has already threatened to remove him like they did with Saddam Hussein. So they know that they're next anyways. So it's, pretty much so. It's a fight for survival. It's kill or be killed out there, just like it's going to be over here. Civil uprisings everywhere. Yeah, you're going to see a lot of dissidents, right? Especially when they usher in the MOTB, you're going to see a lot of people refuse it. The elect are going to refuse it for sure, but so are a lot of others, man. A lot of others ain't down with having a chip inside of them to, control everything. There's going to be a lot of resistance, kind of like Dennis Leary was in that movie. Yeah, that movie Demolition Man is it quite shows you a lot. But like everything else, though, that fervent heat that's coming, that was spoken of, that nuclear destruction is coming. Everybody's going to be killed in that day. 2/3 of our people are going to be cut off in that day. Saith the Lord of hosts, And it's not too far from now. I'd be very surprised You know, if they didn't usher in the MOTB this year, considering everything that's happened, they're going to definitely push for it. And Apostle Tahar is kind of giving us a line, you know, that, well, they'll really push for it around September, October, you know, because 6 months into this war, everything's going to be busted anyways, you know. So that would make about the 6th mark. So, you know, again, you know, looking at that, well, they're going to push it anyways, but then they're going to mandate it. And there's a law that's supposed to go into place that everybody has to have, you know, digital wallet by January next year. Trump has already signed that law. So, well, what's the other part of that law? Yeah, sure, digital money doesn't require a chip as of yet, but it soon will. Because like everything else, to prove your identity, right? Because the identity crisis, because of sleeper cells, because of false flags. You know, there's even rumor that, you know, because they blew up a bridge in Iran, that Iran may do a retaliatory strike on the Golden Gate Bridge. That would be a false flag event, but that's rumor that's going around. A lot of people are saying that they could do a false flag. See, whenever there's rumors of wars now, false flag is quite often used because everybody knows that almost all the wars were based upon a false flag, based upon lies. And pretty much, though, the greatest lie of all is that Iran was trying to build a nuclear weapon. You know, they don't have to because they already have enough allies that have them, especially Russia and China have them. So why would they need them, right? But they can easily import it into Iran. Even North Korea is an ally of Iran. They could send their ICBMs. Oh, wait, I think that North Korea is sending them ICBMs. See, all deals are off the table. Trump already squashed the P5+1. He already squashed any nuclear arms treaty. He squashed the one with Russia. Russia and Trump have not agreed upon anything. They've talked about it, but no new treaty has been made. So like everything else, though, well, the number of them is 200,000. 200 million of these nuclear missiles are worldwide, and most of them will be fired upon this place, Babylon. But pretty much, though, well, the places that, you know, in the Valley of Jehoshaphat will also be destroyed, right? Because, well, where is this war? Right there in the Persian Gulf. 2 Ezra chapter 16, it reads, woe be unto thee, Babylon and Asia. You know, so you already know that it's already happening there in West Asia. Woe be unto thee, Egypt and Syria. Oh, so in this verse, it's talking about Syria. Is that not where they're trying to lead sorties against Iran? So the Third World War comes to Syria and Egypt, according to this. So that indeed is talking about the destruction coming to Damascus in that day. Gird up yourselves with clothes of sack and hair. Bewail your children and be sorry, for your destruction is at hand. A sword is sent upon you, who may turn it back? A fire is sent among you, who may quench it? Sounds like nuclear weapons to me. Plagues are sent upon you, and who is he that can drive them away? May anyone turn again the arrow that is shot of a strong archer? Yep, those are the ICBMs. So there it is. You already know that this Third World War is coming quickly. The mighty Lord Yahweh Hashem Yahushai sendeth the plagues, and who is he that can drive away? Fire shall come forth from his wrath, and who is he that may quench it? So like everything else, though, no one can quench the fire when it's in stubble. This place of Esau Edom is going to be for stubble. So, hey, you know, to anybody that's thinking about, oh, well, I could just take the chip and I could be safe. You cannot take it out of you once you get it, and you're guaranteed your part in that lake of fire, which is when this place is consumed by nuclear fire. So, we've warned you time and time again, and we're just telling you what's happening as it happens. We've warned you about this years ago. We've been telling it for quite some time. Now it's happening. So hopefully, this has all been edifying. For that, I want to say, Barak the Yahweh, Barak the Yahweh Shai, Ba'ashem Rakakarash, Wa Abba Babal. Brakathum, your hopeful elect. Repent while you still have time, especially if you want to be part of the elect, the hopeful elect. Shalom.